Well, good morning, everyone. I thank you so much for joining us for our New Life online worship service. I hope that you all had a good Thanksgiving, and even though it looks different than normal this year, pray that you were able to reflect on and see the blessings that God has given you. Pastor Scott will be joining us this morning as he shares with us a little bit more about why we give thanks and about what that looks like through the faithfulness of God. Let's go to Pastor Scott.
Well, I want to take a moment to just wish you a belated happy Thanksgiving. This has been an unusual year, so it's okay that our wishes for a happy Thanksgiving are coming the Sunday after Thanksgiving instead of our normal way of doing it. No doubt many of us, you have made changes to your plans and your holiday plans. For us as a church, we normally have our Thanksgiving service the Sunday before Thanksgiving, have a big meal, and a lot of people come out, and it is a great time, fellowship, and a great time to reflect on the blessings of God. Missed that this year, and it certainly was very, very different. But I hope that in the midst of everything that has taken place, and even though it has been very, very different this year, I hope that this past week you did take time to stop and to be thankful. And like I said, I know that it's been a difficult time, difficult year for most of us. But even in all the chaos, I hope that you realize that God has been faithful to you. That His faithfulness hasn't changed. So this morning, since we weren't able to do it this past week, I want to take time this morning and just give thanks to God. I know many people are looking and longing for 2020 to be over. I think I'm not so sure that we can just rely upon at midnight at the end of 2020 that everything's going to change. At 12:01 on January 1st, 2021, everything will be different. I'm not so sure. I think we still live in a world of ups and downs, but that every day, good or bad, God is faithful. And I hope that you have been able to reflect upon God's goodness. Maybe this morning in the sermon, you'll take time to recognize the faithfulness of God in your own life through this past year. This morning we're going to take and allow some people who, I've asked them to share their stories of 2020, and we know that the COVID-19 got most of the headlines this year. But it wasn't just COVID-19 that we had to deal with. Life continues on, good and bad, all the time, every year. It's just in the midst of a pandemic, it highlights some of the more difficult moments that we have to go through. And it was people dealing with life and the normal highs and lows that complicated life. And we try to find our way through this pandemic. Some of the seasons of life and the difficult seasons of life we can anticipate. We know that those things and difficult times are going to come, and we try to prepare for them as best we can. I think we discover in those moments that they can still be more difficult than we realize. But at other times, there's other difficult seasons in life that come with absolutely no warning. As probably most of you are aware of the story with Sarah and our family. We faced one of those just this past August. Many of you have heard me talk about the situation. Well, I think you've heard me say enough about it. I want to take time and allow Sarah to tell her own story this morning.
So whenever I was asked to share testimony for a Thanksgiving service this year, this was not exactly what I had in mind, but it kind of seems like that's how this year has gone. You make plans for everything, and then life throws you a curveball, and all goes out the window. It seems like COVID has just affected everyone in some way or another, and a lot of families, especially in our church, have also gone through other major trials as well. My family is one of those. We definitely faced the biggest trial that we've ever been through, but God was faithful through all of it. And so for anyone who may not know, in August I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. and I had just gone to the doctor for a normal checkup, and then she saw some things that just didn't seem right and ordered an MRI. And the afternoon after I got the MRI, we got the news that there was a large mass on my brain and I would need to have surgery to remove it. This was really shocking and terrifying news for all of our family and friends, but it was really hard for me at first because it just didn't seem real. I had a few symptoms, but nothing major, and I had dealt with them for a while, so I just was struggling with the fact to just that it was real. Everyone was asking how I was holding up, and it was just so weird to see people that I cared about being so worried about me, but then not feeling like anything was wrong. And it wasn't until over a week later that I got the chance to look at the MRI, and it really hit me that this was real life. In a few weeks, I would have a major brain surgery, and my life would never be the same. That night, I broke down and started crying and praying, and I was terrified. After that night, I felt a peace. I was still scared, but it was like God was telling me that everything was going to be okay. The surgeon had given us several warnings of what would probably happen during and after surgery. They said that because the tumor was so large and it was right on my facial nerve that they wouldn't be able to get all of it. They were going to do their best to get 95 to 99% of it, but it was not possible to get all of it. If what was left was going to continue to grow, I would have to get a radiation treatment. And they also said that my facial nerve would be damaged and it would cause facial weakness that might be permanent. They told us that the surgery would last at least 12 hours and might have to be split into 2 days. I would also be in the hospital for 3 to 5 days after surgery. We asked everyone to pray specifically for all of these things, and so many people were praying, and God answered every single prayer. They were able to get 100% of the tumor, and there was no damage to any of my nerves. The surgery was done in about 7 hours, and I was in recovery. I got to go home within 2 days, within 48 hours after surgery, which was a record. And all of my doctors said it was a miracle. God was so faithful. Unfortunately, my trial did not end there. I did really well my first week home, but then it hit really hard. The steroid that I was on to help with the swelling was causing a lot of side effects. I was having anxiety attacks that would come out of nowhere, and I couldn't think clearly. I knew what was happening in my head, and I would respond to situations, but I just couldn't communicate normally. This was the most difficult and frustrating time of my life. It was so difficult to see the people that I love and worry about me, but not be able to tell them it was okay. I had so many thoughts in my head, but nothing would come out. Things that were normally so easy became so difficult. I remember one morning I went to pour a cup of coffee. I got the cup and I grabbed the pot, but I couldn't pick it up. Not because it was heavy or anything, but because everything in me was saying to just pour the coffee, but I was frozen. I just couldn't. That happened with several other things as well. And as difficult as this time was for me, I always felt God's presence. I felt closer to God than I've ever been. Because I was unable to do anything, I got to pray and talk to God a lot more. God also used my story to touch a ton of other lives. People who didn't normally pray so that they were praying for me. People were asking questions that they don't normally ask about God. And I know of at least one person who got saved through hearing my story. And all of these things made every struggle and every difficult time worth it. God was just so faithful through this process. And I felt so much love from everywhere, from the prayers, the encouraging texts and phone calls, and all the sweet cards. It really opened up my eyes to all of my blessings. I have an amazing family and friends, an amazing church family, and I had been healed. And most importantly, God was using this story to touch other people's lives. I never thought that a brain tumor would make me feel the most blessed that I've ever felt in my entire life. You may be faced with struggles in life, but God always has a plan even when you can't see it. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for sharing your testimony. And I want to, again, thank everyone who was praying for Sarah and praying for our family. But we weren't the only ones going through difficult times this year. So now I want to introduce to you one of our families that they too have entered into a difficult season in their life. And a lot of it was complicated by the pandemic. Matt and Leah Willis have been faithful followers of Christ for many years and faithful members of New Life Baptist Church. They've been a blessing to me and to many people in our church. And I've asked them if they'll just share with you their story of this year.
Hello, my name is Matt Willis. This is my wife Leah. We're just a couple sinners saved by grace, hoping to encourage you in your faith today to know that God is faithful.
When I think about God's faithfulness, especially over the last couple of months, we've dealt with having both parents in and out of the hospital and some pretty severe situations with them both, and then the ups and downs of having decisions to make and just not knowing which direction to go in some things, and God's faithfulness, I was reminded of it pretty much every day, that even though things go, we get good news one day and bad news the next, and then good news and then bad news, and even though all of that happened, I always had a sense that God was still listening and still watching out for me. And I knew that because when I would pray, I would feel calm and peace. And then someone would send a text to me, and I would see a Facebook post that was just super encouraging. And I had a few days that were really rough, and just cried out to God because I just had no idea how to deal with them. But I always felt His presence with me through all of that. And then I was reminded of a quote that I heard one of our preachers, I think it was Aaron Parks, just said, "Nothing I could do would make God love me anymore. Nothing I will do can make God love me less." And to me, that speaks to His faithfulness through everything that's going on in our lives, whether it's up or down, and all the circumstances. They're not necessarily good or bad, but God uses everything in our lives to bring about His will for our lives. And that's something that I've discovered a lot more in the last couple of months. And that's, His faithfulness is just so present and steadfast that whether I'm faithful or not, He is, and that doesn't change.
Like Leah said, we've had some ups and downs with our parents, with their health lately. My dad was in ICU for a couple weeks. When he first went in, I got a call from his doctor encouraging me to make final arrangements for him. And I certainly wasn't ready for that. I told the doctor that we would continue to pray for my dad and for his care. And I left it at that. In other words, that we would turn it over to God. But Dad got better, and he came home, and God's answer to those prayers was yes for us. But sometimes God's answer to prayer is no, which is hard. Kind of like a parent telling a child no. Sometimes the child doesn't take it very well. But that doesn't mean that God isn't faithful. It just means that the answer is no. God is faithful. He's faithful to His word. He's faithful in his promise of heaven for those who believe. He's faithful to stand by us in the worst of times. Jesus said that he would be with us to the end of the age. God is faithful. God's merciful. He's gracious. And he loves everybody. He loves you. We would encourage you to delve into his word and see how that faithfulness plays out in your own life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love you, Lord, for your mercy never fails me. In all my days I've been held in your hands. The moment that I wake up until I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. And every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire, in darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I have lived in the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With a life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after me. Cause all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing, yeah, I will sing. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Yes, I will sing of the goodness. So I will sing of the goodness
Well, thank you, Philip and Sarah, for that song. That song, is one that I really first paid attention to and noticed during the trial of our life that we were going through. And I remember being in the car headed to work one morning and that song coming on the radio and thinking, wow, God really has been faithful all of my life. But to fully recognize that, you have to go through some trials. You go through the good times, but you also have to go through the difficult times, and then you're able to look back and recognize, man, God's been faithful. It's not that life has always been easy. And we make a mistake if we believe that God's faithfulness has to do with the level of comfort that we live our life. The way things going our way and getting out of life all that we are looking for. But I know that all of my life, God has been faithful. And that had a profound impact upon me as I thought about that. I think this truth, and it's true, Scripture teaches us that God is faithful. And that's one of those hindsight truths. It means the most to us when we can look back upon it. Because we can believe that truth, we can learn that truth and believe that truth, but until we actually experience it for ourselves, and it's not that you can just experience it by reading that God is faithful, and say, okay, yeah, God is faithful. No, you have to look back and see God's hand in your own life. That's when it means the most to you. That's when we find its deepest meaning. When we look back and we can see and we can reflect upon it. And I think that's where faithfulness or thankfulness begins. We have this season of Thanksgiving. And to truly be thankful, we have to look back at our life. And this year, when we look back, you probably had a lot of difficult situations and circumstances, unusual situations and circumstances. Times in your life where it was just so uncertain you didn't know what to expect. I hope that you were able to look back and see that God's been faithful through it all. That is where true thanksgiving comes from. We need to understand on this truth of God's faithfulness that is true every moment of every day. The good times and the bad times. And it's also true whether you believe that it's true or not. We find its greatest meaning in our life when we understand that truth and we can look back and we can see it being played out. But even if you struggle seeing that because all you can see is the difficulty of the circumstances of your life, it doesn't change this truth that God remained faithful. That's what I love. One of the things that we have to understand about God is He does not change for us according to what we believe about Him. Even if you don't believe in Him, that does not make God non-existent. He exists and He is who He is, no matter what you or I believe about Him. He's faithful. And when it comes to God's faithfulness, I think it can be easily overlooked. I think it can be overlooked in the good times of life because we take credit where credit is not due. But I also think it can be overlooked during the difficult times in life because we mistakenly believe that God's faithfulness is going to give us everything that we desire out of life. It's easy for us to be so blessed that we forget it's God's faithfulness, but it's also easy for us to feel so neglected that we fail to see God's faithfulness. There are two primary Hebrew words used to describe the faithfulness of God in the Old Testament. The first is emunah. And it has to do with that quality of God's character. There's this faithfulness, in other words, about God's character, it's who He is. And He can't be anything else other than faithful to who He is. And then there's emeth. And that has to do with the certainty and the reliability of God's work and all that He's going to do. So it's not just that God is faithful in who He is. Because He is faithful to who He is, He's the sovereign God, the creator and sustainer of the universe, who has a plan that goes beyond anything that the world has planned, the government has planned, that you or I have planned as individuals. And He's faithful to His plan. And that means His plan is steadfast. It is certain. And everything that He does in my life, everything that He does in your life, there's a certainty to it. That's the faithfulness of God. The world, on the other hand, the world in which we live, is not faithful. God is faithful. All your life He's been faithful. But the world has not always been faithful. And I hope that you know that there's really nothing in the world that you can ever rely upon as being fully faithful. Let me think about it. What is it that you might say is the most faithful thing in your life? I think for some they would immediately go to this area of love. I think there are those people out there who have been blessed and they have a love in their life that they know and they've been able to rely upon. But human love, even though it should be faithful, the truth is it is not always faithful. I hope that you've experienced a faithful love in your life. But the reality is when we look, and somebody might say, well, a mother's love. And we've heard that phrase. A mother's love is always faithful. Well, I can tell you that one of the saddest things that I have to deal with is when we're dealing with families who the reality is a mother or a father has been unfaithful in their love for their children. And we see that in our society all the time. And we see spouses who love each other, but we also see too many spouses who have experienced betrayal. Listen, if we're talking about faithfulness, and we need to understand this, faithfulness is certain and reliable all the time, in all situations, in all circumstances. And if there's ever a moment where it is untrue, that faithfulness could not be described as it's not certain in that moment, in that circumstance, in across the board, in every situation and in every person, then we're not talking about faithfulness. Not the faithfulness that God has. When we try to look at the faithfulness of God, when we start talking about it, here's the truth. There are no examples of God's faithfulness failing. There are no examples of God's love failing, of God's character failing, of God's forgiveness failing. People fail. Life derails you. But no matter what, God remains faithful. I think we are reminded of this truth in a deep way by James in the New Testament. He says this in chapter 1, beginning verse 16. He says, "Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change." You hear what he's saying? Every good gift, every perfect gift, anything of value in your life comes from God, who is faithful. Nothing about Him ever changes. There's no variation, no shadow. You get what you get every single time, and it's that which is good and perfect. So that everything of value in your life is a result of the faithfulness of God. Now, it isn't that everything you value in life comes from God, but everything that is of value, every good gift, every perfect gift. Because the reality is, sometimes we just have wrong values. We value, we want, we desire the wrong things in life. There's the desires of the flesh. We want, which is the pleasures. And we make decisions in life because we're looking sometimes for pleasure. We value pleasure. Sometimes we value the desires of our eyes. That covetousness, that conformity. We want to be like the world. So we try to make ourselves, we can be guilty of trying to make ourselves into the image of the world or someone that we perceive to be worthy of us being made over in their image. And the reality is, God's desire for us is to be made in the image of His Son and be conformed into the image of His Son. We can be guilty of valuing another image over the image of Jesus Christ. And then there's the pride of life that we sometimes value in life, and that's that lust for power, that lust for making a name for yourself, that lust of wanting what you want and doing whatever is necessary to get it. And that's the pride of life, and saying there's nothing wrong with what I want. Those are things that we might value, but they're not of value. They don't truly add to our life because our life was created by God and for His purposes. That's what's valuable in life, God's love. And the relationship we have with Him because He first loved us and He made that relationship possible by His Son, Jesus Christ. And so our worship and our service for the Lord is based upon because God first loved us. Those things are valuable. But not only is it seen in God's love, but it's also seen in God's purpose for you and for me. To be able to have an impact in this world in such a way that brings glory to God, our Creator, the one who loves us. To be able to share that love with others. To be able to serve others knowing how God cares for them. That's what's valuable. And every good and perfect thing in our life comes because God is faithful to us. And He's faithful in His love to us. And He's faithful in His purpose for us. All else in life is only valuable as it relates to those two things. If it's not directly related to God's love and God's purpose for you, then it really has a small value, even though sometimes we place a higher value on them. You know, I can illustrate it this way because I believe that one of the greatest gifts in my life is my wife. I also believe and know that the only reason that I have my wife is because of God's love for me. She is a gift from God based on His love for me. And how I relate to my wife is now me loving God back in the way that I love my wife and how I care for her. Our marriage relationship is enhanced because it gets its value from God and His faithfulness. It's also enhanced because we find the purpose for our marriage from God, not from ourselves. We don't try to make marriage about what we want because the reality is sometimes what we want is in conflict. We had this conversation just this past Thanksgiving. You know, everybody has their traditions, And for some people, especially some of the guys out there, your tradition may be after you eat a big meal to sit down in front of the TV with the football game on and take a nap. Carolyn and Sarah is like, wait a minute, now we want to sit down in front of the TV, but we want to watch Hallmark Channel and take a nap. There was something in common we had, but there was something completely different that we had, whether we're going to watch football or whether we're going to watch the Hallmark Channel. The reality is, neither one of those have anything to do with our purpose. Those are the things that we want. We don't let those things divide us. Why? Because we know that God has a greater purpose for us in our marriage. And the love that He's shown us to give us this perfect and good gift of marriage is so much greater than what we want or can receive from it on our own. That's God's faithfulness. And that applies to every area of life, whether it's a career or whether it's relationships, whether it's a neighbor, whatever it is, God wants to do something in that, in your life that's good and perfect. Circumstances aren't always good and perfect. But God will be faithful in His love to you and in His purpose. But the circumstances of life can't take that away. We have to understand what is truly good and what is truly perfect in the things that God has given us. And when we understand that, here's what it does for us. If we understand the faithfulness of God, then we are compelled to follow His direction. Because we know that in His faithfulness, He's always going to lead us the right way. Life's journey should be about following after God's plan and God's desire for us, growing in our relationship with Him. Every direction God leads you is based on His faithfulness. The psalmist says it this way in Psalm 25, all the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep His covenant and His testimonies. You see the relationship there? God is saying that He has every path, and we have a variety of paths. There's twists and turns in life, in our life journey, and your journey will look different than my journey. But if it's of God, and you are faithful to be obedient to Him, because whatever path that He has you on is based upon His love and His faithfulness. Too often we measure our journey in the direction of life by the degree of difficulty. That's what I hear a lot of during 2020. Oh, 2020, I think we're going to have to make t-shirts, I survived 2020. They'll go on sale January 1st. We use it as a fundraiser. But we have this degree of difficulty we look at, and it's easy to look sometimes at the hardships of life and dwell upon the hardships of life. The reality is, they are difficult. And 2020 has been difficult. It's been difficult for me. You know, when I reflect upon some of the challenges that just I faced personally. You know, we started in December. I had a knee surgery and had complications that extended well into 2020 and still have not fully recovered, even though things are going well. But shortly after that, while I'm still in this process of rehab and trying to get past all these things, this pandemic starts, and it starts way over in China, and we're not sure, we're not certain, and it's not long, and then we have to cancel a missions trip. One that I was greatly looking forward to. One that not only was I somewhat disappointed that we weren't going to be able to go, but I know that the people that were going with us were so excited to be able to go over to Cambodia and to see the things that God was doing over there. And I felt for them, and I hurt for them because we had to cancel that trip. And I thought that might, okay, if we have to do that, that's not that big a deal. Then the next thing I know, the pandemic has hit here in the United States, and we're having to shut down, and we're having to close services, and we're having so many things in our life being interrupted. And how do we deal with all this? And what's coming next? And are we supposed to just go into lockdown? Because I got to tell you, being locked in my house did not appeal to me at all, as it didn't to some of you as well. And we had to deal with the prospect of my mother-in-law, who is in a long-term care facility, and what that meant for her, and the struggle with that, knowing that not having contact and being locked up, as she would describe it, I feel like I'm in a cage. And we had to struggle with that, and knowing how to respond in our care and our concern for her. And then it wasn't long after that. Matter of fact, it was the night before Father's Day. We received news of a medical emergency with my father down in Texas. And there was some very real uncertainty that night and the next morning as we entered into Father's Day here at the church. Eventually, had put my father on hospice, in hospice care. We're thankful he's still kicking, just not kicking as high as he once did. But we're still trying to figure that out and going down that journey, and that's the path and direction God is leading us on. Our daughter comes home for college for a week, and everything's good and everything's fine, and we're just doing the normal things of what we're supposed to be doing. And in the process of doing normal things, we discover that our daughter has a brain tumor. We had to deal with that for several months. We get past all that, and we make this plan. Okay, we need to go down to Texas to see our family and to allow our family to see us. We were looking forward to going to Texas this Thanksgiving. And then COVID hit our home. We had to cancel that trip. And it's easy when we look and reflect upon all this bad stuff. When we are honestly in the mindset that I'll be so glad when 2020 is over, there can be nothing good with this, about this, and I just need to move on from 2020. The reality is, what I need to do is truly believe in the faithfulness of God. Say, God, what's next? Because whatever next is, I believe completely that you are faithful. And you will be faithful. That your love for me will not change. And your purpose in my life will not change. Because in spite of everything that's happened, here's what I know. Nothing. Nothing has changed about God's love or God's purpose for me. And I know that nothing in your life has changed God's love or God's purpose for you. I don't need to know all the details of your circumstances. I don't need to know how difficult it was. Yes. Many times the journey that God leads us down is difficult. We live in a fallen world. God never promised us that life was going to be easy. He did say that if we follow Him, we will discover that He is always faithful. And He's been faithfully leading throughout this year and throughout my life. All of my life He has been faithful. All of your life He has been faithful. The question isn't if God is faithful. The question is, are we faithfully following Him? Because I know He has always faithfully led. And you know, there was something else that James talked about back in verse 16, before he mentions this wonderful news about the good gifts of God, the perfect gifts of God, that everything of value that we have in our life comes from the faithfulness of God. He starts out with this warning, this to guard against deception concerning God's faithfulness. He said, do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Don't be deceived. Don't think that the good stuff in your life, anything of value in your life, comes from any other source other than God. The deception comes when we think that the good stuff can be obtained from the world or as a result of our own efforts. Because when we start believing that way, when we start thinking that way, we start going down our own path instead of the path that God has for us. I think this was seen very clearly in the life of Jacob. Jacob was one of the fathers of Israel. He was part of that triad, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He was the youngest. He was the son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham. But these are the ones, and we look back in the Old Testament, these are the ones that we always refer to and the Jews would always refer to. But the reality is Jacob's life didn't start out so good. He was born into a blessed family, being the grandson of Abraham, the son of Isaac, but he was born a twin. His twin brother was Esau. And in a world of comparison, he didn't stack up. Because even in his own home, when he compared himself to his twin brother Esau was a hunter, he was a man's man, he was rugged, and Jacob was this very plain person, very quiet. Nothing extraordinary about Jacob. As a result, Esau became the favorite of his dad, Jacob became the favorite of his mother. And that's not a good thing in a patriarchal society. And that's what they lived in. And Jacob probably grew up feeling left out and feeling unloved sometimes by his own father, not measuring up to his brother. And somewhere along the way, Jacob decided that if he was going to get anything out of his life that was of value, he was going to have to take control by any means necessary to do whatever he could to get ahead. And this made Jacob become someone that was untrustworthy as he pursued his own path and his own journey. He would trick his brother out of his birthright. And then when his father, Isaac, is on his deathbed, and then the blessing of the father was so huge in that culture, to be able to pass that on to the eldest son, and Esau by moments was older than Jacob, and by tradition had the right of blessing from his father to carry on the family name and to lead the family. And Jacob, with the help of his mother, tricked Isaac, his father, and robbed Esau of that blessing. But I got to tell you, when you read the story, immediately you see that this was something that he did not think out very well. Because it made his brother so mad that he set out to kill Jacob. And so he finds himself running for his life. Isn't that the case sometimes when we think that we know what's best in life and we pursue our own path outside of what we know God would have us to do, but we become so convinced in our own life that what we want would be better than what God wants for us? We don't think it through very well. And then we find ourselves scrambling for life. Scrambling for meaning. And this is where Jacob's at. And it was on that journey that he has this dream at Bethel. And in that dream, God speaks to him. For the first time, he realized he's been doing life all wrong. He had made all of life about himself. And he says this in Genesis 32, or actually Genesis 25, the Lord shall be my God. And now he's making this commitment that he had never made before, because at that point in his life, up to that point in his life, Jacob had been his own God. And what he's starting to discover is he made for a poor God, because he's not faithful. Now this is the point in life that I feel like sometimes we can make assumptions about God's faithfulness that are incorrect. Because now Jacob has done the right thing. He's made this commitment that the Lord shall be my God. So the assumption might be that now from that point on, everything became good. I think this is where my mom would say that that's really where Jacob started getting his comeuppance. And because he continues his journey to his uncle Laban, and he's there, and he feels safe from Esau and Esau's pursuit, and he falls in love. And he falls in love with Rachel, and her father Laban says, okay, if you work for me for 7 years, then you can marry her. But Laban, very much like Jacob, has his own ideas and his own path. And he deceives Jacob. And he ends up marrying Leah. And how discouraging that had to be, finding out that he had married the wrong one. So Laban makes another plan with him. You can work for me another 7 years, and I'll give you my daughter Rachel. So he works another 7 years. And he finally gets the woman that he loved. And he gets to marry her. And things do start looking up. And he begins to prosper with his flocks in the areas that he is taking care of. Things are going well. Until his brothers-in-law start recognizing this. And jealousy sets in. And they don't like the fact that Jacob is doing so well, better than them. And it's like, wait a minute, he's kind of going to steal our glory, and we can't trust him. And conflict starts arising, and Jacob realizes, I got to get out of here. And the tension is so great that he decides that he should sneak away. When Laban finds out about it, he immediately begins to pursue him. And his thought is, I'm going to catch up with him, and I'm going to let him know. He's going to find out very quickly. But when we read the story, we see that God protected Jacob from Laban, and Laban decided to let him go on his own. And so here's Jacob and his family. At this point, he has 11 kids and all of his flocks and all these things that he has for himself, the life that God has given him. And all these blessings. But all of a sudden he realizes, wait a minute, I'm going back to the place where my brother lives who has sworn to kill me. And the anxiety of that is off the charts. And he starts remembering his past. And he starts remembering all those times when he was away from God. And he's thinking, wait a minute, all this is fixing to catch up with me. And then in Genesis 32, he prays this prayer. O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do good to you. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 camps. I want us to recognize this about Jacob's prayer, about Jacob's life. First of all, he's acknowledging God as God when he talks about God as the God of his father, the God of his grandfather. He's also acknowledging the faithfulness of God and being obedient to him. He's going back because God had told him to go back. And he recognizes God's steadfast love and God's faithfulness. He's able to look back, and in this moment of prayer, he's able to reflect upon his life, and he's saying, God, you have always loved me, and you have always been faithful to me. Not that I have, because he said, I'm not worthy. Here's the thing about God's faithfulness. it doesn't change because you're not worthy. You and I have never been worthy of God's faithfulness. To show His love to us, to keep loving us, to give our life purpose and meaning. He just does. Jacob had come to that place where he stopped pursuing the things of the world. He stopped pursuing his own success and just pursued God. And whatever it is that God would have for him, he started following the faithful God. Even though he himself had not always been faithful. He wasn't deceiving himself anymore. And sometimes we can get to that place where the greatest deception comes from self. And when we start deceiving ourselves about the faithfulness of God and the goodness of God in our life, it is too easy to start thinking that it relies upon us. That's what Jacob used to think. And he realized, wait a minute, if I will just allow God to work it out, if I will obediently follow Him, the things that He has for me, I'm going to see His faithfulness. I'm going to know His love. My life is going to have meaning and purpose. And then that's when you realize, when you look back, and you can say, wait a minute, all my life, God has been faithful. And I'm not worthy of that kind of faithfulness. Because when you start taking your eyes off of what you want and just follow the path that God has for you, in the midst of all the difficulties, in the midst of all the uncertainty, you know that you don't have anything of value to offer God, but He is still giving value to your life. And His love for you, that doesn't stop. You may not get what you're looking for, but you still get that which is good and perfect. And it's seen in God's love. And it's seen in God's purpose for you. I tell you, when we see the faithfulness of God and we can reflect upon it, it gives us courage no matter what we're facing. Because I know, all my life God's been faithful. I don't know what the remainder of 2020 is going to look like. I don't know what 2021 is going to look like. I fully expect there to be good times and bad times. Here's what I know. God is faithful. And I just need to follow Him. Whether it's good times or whether it's bad times. Whether life is difficult, whether it throws me a curve, whether I feel overwhelmed by the circumstances, God will give me the strength to follow Him. He'll give you the strength to follow Him. And then we have a hope for the future. Because I know that which I've committed to Him, He is faithful to keep. I also know that when I mess up, if I will confess my sins, He's faithful and just to forgive me of my sins. I know that He will never leave me nor forsake me. And when I know His presence is with me, you know what else I know? I know that His love is steadfast. I know that His grace is sufficient. How do I know all those things? Because all my life, He's been faithful. And I know that all your life, He's been faithful. And He will continue to be faithful. So follow Him, no matter what. If you're listening today, and maybe you've never placed your faith in Jesus Christ, maybe there's a possibility that you don't even believe that God exists, or you don't believe that God is involved in your life in any way, or in anyone's life in any way. I go back to, it doesn't matter what you believe. That has no impact on who God is. When we think and have this idea that what I believe about God makes God who He is, we're wrong. God is God. He's sovereign and He's holy and He's just. And there's going to be a judgment that comes. For unbelievers, it doesn't matter what you believe. If you don't believe God, that's not going to change the judgment that you will face. And if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, follow faithfully. Because in God's faithfulness, you too will have to give an account for your life on whether you followed faithfully. We don't have to be overcome by the circumstances. Here's what I know about 2020. God has been faithful. Let's follow Him. Father, thank you for your great love to us. Thank you that you are faithful, that no matter what we face in life, we know that we can trust you. Know that your love never fails. Know that your purposes are going to remain. We may not know how to face the trials of this life, but we know who we can trust in the trials of this life. Thank you for that love. Thank you for that faithfulness. Lord, if you're speaking to hearts through this message, for those who may not believe in you, Lord, I pray and I know it is your desire that they would place their faith in your Son, Jesus Christ. I know it is your desire that they would not have to face the judgment to come, that eternal damnation, that you're not willing that they would perish. Father, may they start following you. May they place their faith in the grace that you've extended through your Son, Jesus Christ. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for joining us today. It may be that you're facing some things and some trials that are difficult for you. Like we've already said, God is faithful. But sometimes we need to do more, and we need to have someone that we can talk to. I want to encourage you, if God is speaking to you and you have some struggles that you're going through, you just want to talk to somebody, you can text us. Pull out your phone, text NLBC Connect to 76959. It'll be on your screen. You can text us, the form's going to come up. You can reach out to us, and we will get back with you and be able to talk with you and just share about the faithfulness of God. If you've not placed your faith in Jesus Christ, I know more than anything else that God wants you to be saved. He wants you to be restored in a relationship to Him, and you can be. Not through anything that I will do for you or anything that you will do for yourself, but all because of what Jesus Christ has already done upon the cross. We want to talk to you about that. So you too can pull out your phone and text NLBC Connect to 76959. Just let us know in that form that you want to know more about having a relationship with God. And we will respond to you in a timely fashion. Lord bless you. Have a great day.
Well, we want to thank you once again this morning for joining us for our New Life Online worship service. As Pastor Scott mentioned, if you made a decision this morning to follow Jesus Christ, or maybe you made a decision recognizing you have this relationship, but you need to follow and understand His faithfulness better, and you're beginning to understand that. Or maybe you just have questions about the church, or something you want us to pray for you for. You can connect with us by texting NLBC Connect to 76959, and we'll get back with you as soon as we can. If you're a part of our church family, and you want to continue your worship that you joined us for this morning, and do that through your giving, you can do that in one of two ways. you can go to our website, newlifeonline.us, and click on the Give tab, or you can text NLBC to 76959. And as you know, Thanksgiving time is over, and the next thing we have coming up is our Christmas holiday and season. One thing that I love to do every single year is take the holiday gift baskets out to some of the people in the church. It's a wonderful opportunity to connect. We're going to be making a change this year, actually. It's going to be a ladies' ministry. And all the ladies in the church are invited to come out and join us as we get this ministry going. It's going to be on December 12th at 2 p.m. here at the church. We'll be putting those baskets together and delivering them. Also, I want to let you know that the baskets are going to be prepared safely, and when we go and deliver them, we will not be going into anyone's home. And once again, I just want to thank you for joining us today, and may God bless.